Willa had always been what the station's more diplomatic residents called enthusiastically curious, and what everyone else called completely insane. This particular morning started like any other on Galactic Research Station Omega-9, which is to say, it began with someone, somewhere, having a complete meltdown about something Willa had done. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The something, in this case, happened to be harboring what the automated security systems had flagged as unauthorized biological specimens of potentially hazardous classification. The someone having the meltdown was Commander Zorak, whose forearms were currently gesticulating in what could generously be described as controlled panic, and less generously described as the kind of flailing usually reserved for creatures who'd just realized they were on fire. "This is unprecedented," Zorak's voice crackled through the station's communication system, his Altarian accent making every word sound like it was being filtered through gravel and disappointment. "We have protocols. We have procedures. We have... A human who thinks rules are more like suggestions," came the weary voice of Dr. Venth from the medical bay. The Keltharian's tone carried the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent the better part of 3 months dealing with what the station had unofficially dubbed Willa situations. Willa herself was blissfully unaware of the chaos erupting in her name. She sat at her workstation in Research Wing Delta, a steaming cup of something that was probably coffee clutched in one hand, while her other hand gently scratched behind what appeared to be a small, furry ear protruding from the front pocket of her oversized hoodie. The ear twitched appreciatively. "Good morning, Station Omega-9, came the announcement over the intercom. "This is Commander Zorak. We are implementing Security Protocol Epsilon-9. All personnel in Research Wing Delta are to remain at their stations while security conducts a routine inspection." Willa paused mid-scratch. "Epsilon-9?" she muttered to her pocket. "That's the one for dangerous alien artifacts, isn't it?" A soft chirping sound emerged from her hoodie. "Yeah, I thought so too." The thing about Galactic Research Station Omega-9 was that it had been designed by committee. Not just any committee, mind you, but a committee composed of representatives from 18 different species, each of whom had very strong opinions about everything from corridor width to the proper temperature for communal spaces. The result was a station that looked like someone had taken a perfectly reasonable space structure and then let a group of very creative but slightly drunk architects have their way with it. Research Wing Delta was no exception. It sprawled across 2 levels with laboratories that ranged from sterile white chambers that could double as operating theaters to Willa's lab, which looked like a cross between a greenhouse, a veterinary clinic, and someone's very cluttered garage. Plants from 6 different worlds grew in carefully controlled environments, alongside terrariums housing various small creatures that had been deemed scientifically interesting, but probably harmless. The security team that came marching down the corridor looked like they were preparing to storm a fortress, rather than investigate a potential paperwork violation. Zorak led the charge, his pale blue skin taking on an almost purple hue that usually indicated either extreme stress or the Altarian equivalent of high blood pressure. Behind him came a mixed group of security personnel. 2 hulking Corvan guards, whose idea of subtlety was using smaller weapons, a delicate-looking Thessian whose 4 eyes were constantly scanning for threats and bringing up the rear, a human security officer who looked like he was questioning his career choices. "Remember," Zorak announced as they reached the entrance to Research Wing Delta, "we are looking for unauthorized biological specimens. According to the automated systems, they are located in Laboratory 12 Delta. That's Willa's lab, the human security officer said helpfully. Of course it is, Zorak sighed. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a routine inspection came when they opened the door to Laboratory 12 Delta and were greeted not by the usual organized chaos of Willa's workspace, but by what sounded like a very quiet, very content purring. The second sign came when they realized the purring was coming from multiple sources. Willa looked up from her workstation with the expression of someone who'd been caught doing something perfectly innocent and couldn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss. "Oh, hey everyone. Is this about the requisition forms? Because I swear I filled those out." "Mostly." Zorak's eyes, all three of them, focused on the movement in Willa's hoodie pocket. Something small and decidedly alive was shifting around in there, and from the sound of it, it wasn't alone. "Willa," Zorak said, in the tone of voice usually reserved for defusing bombs or negotiating with terrorists, "what is in your pocket?" "My pocket?" Willa glanced down as if she'd forgotten. More purring emerged from her hoodie. "Oh, right. The cubs." The silence that followed this announcement was the kind of silence that comes right before someone starts screaming. It was Dr. Venth, joining the group via communicator, who broke it. "Cubs?" His voice went up about 3 octaves. "What kind of cubs?" "Nexari cubs," Willa said, as if this explained everything. Which, in a way, it did. And in every other way, it absolutely did not. The Thessian security officer's 4 eyes went wide. The Corvin guards exchanged looks that suggested they were reconsidering their stance on the whole, probably harmless, assessment. The human security officer just sighed and reached for his datapad to start filling out what was undoubtedly going to be a very long incident report. Commander Zorak, however, went very still. "Nexari cubs," he repeated slowly. "Yeah, 2 of them. They're sleeping." Willa's tone was so casual she might have been discussing the weather. "They had a rough night." "Willa," Zorak said, his voice climbing toward hysteria, "Nexari are a protected species under Galactic Conservation Statute 96. Unauthorized possession of Nexari juveniles carries penalties up to and including—" "Oh, relax," Willa interrupted, reaching into her hoodie and gently extracting a creature that looked like someone had crossed a kitten with a small bear, and then given the result the most adorable oversized ears in the known galaxy. "It's not like I kidnapped them. Their mom got hurt in that meteor shower last week, and they needed somewhere to stay while she recovered." The cub in her hands opened sleepy amber eyes and made a sound that was part chirp, part purr, and entirely designed to make every maternal instinct in a 50-meter radius sit up and pay attention. It nuzzled against Willa's palm, then seemed to notice the crowd of armed aliens staring at it. "Authorized by whom?" Zorak managed to ask. "Well, technically." Willa paused, looking thoughtful. "I guess by me? I mean, their mom was bleeding and they were scared, so I just, did what seemed right." And there it was. The most human response possible to a crisis. Ignore the rules. Ignore the consequences. Ignore the potential for interstellar incidents. And just do what seemed right at the time. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had gotten humans banned from 3 different sectors, started 2 diplomatic crises, and somehow also resulted in them being invited to join the Galactic Council as cultural consultants. The second cub poked its head out of Willa's hoodie, took one look at the assembled security force, and made a decision that would later be described in official reports as tactically sound. It dove back into the pocket and refused to come out, no matter how much coaxing was involved. "Where?" Zorak asked, with the patience of someone who was rapidly running out of patience. is their mother now. Medical Bay, Level 3. Dr. Venth's been taking care of her. She should be ready to travel in a few days, assuming the bone graft takes properly. Willa scratched the visible cub behind its ridiculous ears. Isn't that right, little one? The cub responded with a series of chirps that sounded remarkably like agreement. Dr. Venth's voice crackled through the communicator with the tone of someone who'd just realized they'd been set up. Willa, when you brought me that injured Nexari female, you said she was alone. She was alone when I brought her to you, Willa replied, with the kind of logic that was technically correct and completely unhelpful. The cubs were with me. For 6 days? They wouldn't leave. Willa shrugged. I tried taking them back to their mom the first day, but they just kept following me around. Finally figured it was easier to let them stay until she was better. Commander Zorak was making notes on his datapad with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew this was going to require a lot of paperwork. And you didn't think to inform station security that you were harboring protected alien juveniles? I put in a request for temporary foster care authorization. You did? Zorak looked surprised. Yeah, I sent it to... Let me think. Animal control? No, wait. That's for the station cats. Xenobiology department? No, that's my department. Oh. Willa snapped her fingers. I sent it to the diplomatic corps. Seemed like the right place for interspecies issues. The silence that followed this revelation was broken by what sounded like someone choking. It turned out to be the human security officer, who was trying very hard not to laugh. The diplomatic corps, Zorak repeated. Uh-huh. Haven't heard back yet, but I figured no news was good news. Willa, Dr. Venth's voice came through the communicator with the careful tone of someone explaining something to a very bright child. The diplomatic corps handles treaty negotiations and trade agreements. They don't process animal care permits. Oh, Willa considered this. Well, that explains why they haven't gotten back to me. The cub in her hands had apparently decided that the assembled crowd was sufficiently non-threatening and began exploring Willa's fingers with tiny, surprisingly dexterous paws. When it encountered her thumb, it grabbed on with all 4 paws and began what could only be described as wrestling with it. This is... Commander Zorak started, then stopped, apparently unable to find words adequate to the situation. Completely typical, suggested the human security officer. I was going to say unprecedented, but your version works too. Willa looked around at the assembled security team with the expression of someone who genuinely couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. Look, they're fine. They're healthy, they're happy, and their mom's going to be okay. What's the problem? The problem, Zorak said, his 3 eyes focusing on her with laser precision, is that you have been harboring members of a protected species without authorization for 6 days. The problem is that Nexari cubs require specialized care that you are not qualified to provide. The problem is that their mother is probably worried sick. And the problem is that this could be considered kidnapping under interstellar law. Oh, Willa looked down at the cub, which had given up wrestling with her thumb and was now attempting to groom her knuckles. When you put it like that, it does sound kind of bad. Kind of bad? Zorak's voice cracked slightly. Willa, do you have any idea what the Nexari government does to people who harm their young? Nothing good, I'm guessing. They declare it an act of war. The laboratory fell quiet, except for the soft purring coming from Willa's hoodie, and the gentle sounds of the cub in her hands attempting to clean her fingernails. Outside, the normal sounds of the station continued. The hum of air recyclers, the distant chatter of personnel going about their daily routines, the occasional announcement over the intercom. "Well," Willa said finally, "I guess we should probably sort this out before it becomes an interstellar incident." Commander Zorak looked at her with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering his stance on the whole humans as cultural consultants thing. "Yes," he said slowly, "I think that would be wise." Conference Room Alpha was the kind of space designed to intimidate. It featured a massive oval table that could comfortably seat 30 beings, holographic displays that could project everything from stellar maps to trade agreements, and lighting that had been carefully calibrated to make everyone look either very important or very guilty, depending on which end of the table they were sitting at. Willa sat at the guilty end, still wearing her hoodie with its increasingly active cargo. The Cubs had apparently decided that a formal tribunal was the perfect time to wake up from their nap and begin what sounded like a heated discussion about breakfast. The soft chirping and purring emanating from her pocket provided a surreal soundtrack to what was shaping up to be one of the most unusual disciplinary hearings in station history. Across from her sat what could charitably be described as a jury of her peers, if her peers happened to be a collection of alien bureaucrats who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. The tribunal consisted of Station Administrator Kellix, whose crystalline features reflected the room's lighting in ways that suggested either deep thought or a migraine. Cultural Liaison Vorthak, a Zentorian whose translator was making unpleasant grinding noises every few minutes, and presiding over the whole affair, Commander Zorak, who had traded his security uniform for formal dress clothes that made him look like he was attending either a court-martial or a funeral. "Let me see if I understand this correctly," Administrator Kellix began, her voice creating harmonics that made the water glasses on the table vibrate slightly. 6 days ago, during the meteor shower that damaged the station's outer hull, you encountered an injured Nexari female in Corridor Delta 9. "That's right," Willa confirmed. One of the Cubs chose that moment to poke its head out of her hoodie pocket, assess the situation, and disappear again with a soft chirp of what sounded distinctly like disapproval. "And your first instinct was to provide medical assistance." "Well, yeah, she was hurt." Cultural Liaison. Vorthak leaned forward, his 6 arms folding in a gesture that his species used to indicate either deep concentration or preparation for violence. His translator crackled to life. "According to your statement, the female was accompanied by 2 juveniles. The Cubs, yeah, they were pretty scared. And you decided to... what exactly?" Commander Zorak consulted his data pad. "Take them all to the medical bay?" "Just their mom at first. She had some kind of internal bleeding and a broken leg. Well, what I think was a leg. Nexari anatomy isn't really my specialty." Willa shifted in her chair, causing more sounds of movement from her hoodie. The Cubs wouldn't leave her side initially, but once Dr. Venth got her stabilized and sedated, they just attached themselves to me. Administrator Kellix made a note on her crystalline tablet. Attached themselves. Followed me around. When I tried to leave them in the medical bay, they started making this sound like... Willa paused, apparently trying to find words for something that didn't translate well. Like the universe was ending. Really pitiful. Dr. Venth said it was stress-related, and that separating them from their mother might cause psychological damage. "So you took them with you," Zorak said, his tone suggesting this was somehow both the most obvious and the most inexplicable decision possible. Seemed like the humane thing to do. "The humane thing," repeated Cultural Liaison Vorthak, his translator adding a particularly judgmental crackle to the words, "was to contact the Nexari embassy immediately." "Oh, Willa looked genuinely surprised. "We have one of those?" The silence that followed this question was the kind of silence that comes right before someone starts questioning the basic competency of everyone involved in the situation. "Willa," Commander Zorak said slowly, "we are a galactic research station. We have embassies for 18 different species." "Huh. I probably should have known that. You've been here for 8 months." "Yeah, but I mostly stick to the lab areas. I'm not really the diplomatic type." Administrator Kellix's crystalline features shifted in what was probably the equivalent of a headache. "Let me continue. You took the cubs to your quarters. For the first night, yeah. But they didn't sleep much, kept chirping and looking for their mom. So the next day I brought them to the lab with me. Figured they'd be calmer if they could stay close while I worked." "And they nested in your clothing?" "Sort of. They really like the hoodie. I think it's the texture. It's this soft fleece material. Plus it's warm and dark in the pocket." Willa reached into her hoodie and gently extracted one of the cubs, which immediately began exploring her palm with its tiny paws. "See? Perfectly content." The assembled tribunal stared at the creature, which chose that moment to roll over in Willa's hand and grab her thumb with all 4 paws, engaging in what appeared to be a life-or-death struggle with her nail. "They're very small," Administrator Kellix observed. "Nexari cubs don't reach full size until they're about a standard year-old," Willa explained. "These 2 are maybe 3 months. Their mom's pretty young, too. Probably a first time." Mother. Cultural liaison. Vorthak's translator made a sound like grinding metal. "You seem remarkably well informed about Nexari development for someone who claims xenobiology isn't really her specialty." "I've been reading up on it. You know, trying to make sure I wasn't doing anything harmful." Willa shrugged. "Turns out Nexari cubs are surprisingly similar to Earth mammals in terms of basic care needs. They require warmth, regular feeding, social contact, and a safe environment." "Social contact," Commander Zorak repeated. "Yeah, they're pack animals. In the wild, cubs stay close to their family group until they're mature. Separating them causes severe distress." "And you determined this how?" "Research. Also, the first day I tried to leave them in the medical bay, they cried for 6 hours straight and refused to eat." Dr. Venth's voice crackled through the conference room's communication system. "I can confirm that. The distress calls were significant. We could hear them 3 levels down." Administrator Kellix made another note. "Dr. Venth, you've been treating the mother. What is her current condition?" "Stable and improving. The internal injuries were more extensive than initially assessed, but she's responding well to treatment. She should be ready for transport within the next few days." "And she's aware that her cubs are elsewhere?" There was a pause. "That's complicated." "How is it complicated?" Commander Zorak asked. "Well, when she first regained consciousness, she was naturally distressed about her cubs. But when I explained that they were being cared for by the human who found them, she seemed relieved." "Relieved?" "Nexari maternal instincts are very strong, but they're also pragmatic. In the wild, if a mother is injured or ill, she'll accept help from other pack members. The fact that her cubs were bonding with a caregiver rather than suffering from separation anxiety was apparently reassuring to her." Cultural liaison. Vorthak's arms folded in a way that suggested skepticism. "She accepted a human as a surrogate pack member?" "According to my observations, yes. When Willa brought the cubs for their daily visit with their mother, the female showed no signs of distress or territorial behavior. In fact, she seemed to approve of the arrangement." Willa looked up from where she was watching the cub attempt to groom her knuckles. She head-bonked me. She what? Administrator Kellix asked. Head-bonked. It's this thing Nexari do. They bump their foreheads against pack members as a sign of acceptance and trust. She did it to me on the third day. The tribunal exchanged looks. Commander Zorak was the first to speak. So the mother considers you part of her pack? I guess. I mean, I don't speak Nexari, but Dr. Venth seemed to think it was significant. It's extremely significant, Dr. Venth confirmed through the communicator. Nexari don't extend pack status lightly, especially to other species. It indicates a level of trust that's unusual. Unusual how? Administrator Kellix asked. Well, for one thing, it means she's essentially given Willa permission to care for her cubs. From a Nexari perspective, this isn't kidnapping. It's fostering. The silence that followed this revelation was broken by the soft sound of the cub in Willa's hands, finally succeeding in its battle with her thumbnail and settling down for what appeared to be a victory nap. So, Commander Zorak said slowly, legally speaking, this is a mess, Cultural Liaison Vorthax translator crackled. Nexari pack law isn't recognized under standard galactic statutes, but it might be covered under the Cultural Practices Exemption Clause. The what now? Willa asked. Administrator Kellix's crystalline features brightened slightly. It's a provision that allows for the recognition of species-specific cultural practices in legal proceedings, provided they don't violate basic sentient rights. In other words, Commander Zorak said, if the Nexari consider this a legitimate fostering arrangement under their cultural law, we might not have an interstellar incident on our hands. We might not, Vorthak agreed, but we still have the problem of unauthorized care of protected species, failure to report the presence of said species to proper authorities, and, he consulted his own datapad, improper filing of foster care documentation. About that, Willa said, looking slightly embarrassed. I may have sent that request to the wrong department. We're aware. And I may have filled out the wrong forms. We're aware of that too. And I may have listed the cubs as domestic pets instead of sentient juveniles. The silence that followed this admission was the kind of silence that comes right before someone starts reconsidering their life choices. You listed them as pets? Administrator Kellix asked faintly. The form was really confusing. There were all these categories and subcategories, and sentient juvenile wasn't one of the options. The closest thing was companion animal, so I went with that. Cultural Liaison Vorthax translator made a sound like a mechanical sigh. This is why we have protocols. Hey, I tried to follow protocols. It's not my fault your forms are written in bureaucratic gibberish. Commander Zorak looked like he was developing the kind of headache that no amount of medication could cure. Willa, in the future, when you encounter members of a protected species, your first action should be to contact station security. Even if they're hurt, especially if they're hurt. What if security isn't available? Security is always available. What if it's an emergency? Then you contact medical first, then security. What if medical is busy? Willa, Zorak said with the patience of someone who was rapidly running out of patience. There are procedures for these things. Right, but procedures don't really account for scared baby aliens who just want someone to keep them warm and safe. She looked down at the cub, which had apparently decided her fingers were the perfect pillow. I mean, look at them. They're not exactly threatening galactic security. That's not the point. Isn't it, though? I mean, what's more important, Following procedures or making sure nobody gets hurt? And there it was again. The most human response possible to bureaucracy. Ignore the rules when they get in the way of doing what's right. It was the kind of thinking that drove administrators to drink and philosophers to write very long papers about the nature of ethics versus law. Administrator Kellix looked at her tablet, then at the cub sleeping in Willa's hands, then at her tablet again. "This is," she began, then stopped. "A nightmare of paperwork," Commander Zorak finished helpfully. "I was going to say unprecedented, but that works too." The cub in Willa's hands stirred, opened one amber eye, assessed the situation, and went back to sleep with a soft purr that somehow managed to sound smug. "Well," Willa said cheerfully, "look on the bright side. At least nobody started a war." The tribunal had just reached the point where everyone was staring at their datapads with the desperate hope that the right combination of legal precedents and bureaucratic loopholes might spontaneously appear when the conference room's doors opened with the kind of dramatic timing usually reserved for Hollywood dramas. The figure who entered was tall, elegant, and moved with the fluid grace that marked her as unmistakably Nexari. Her fur was a deep silver blue that seemed to shimmer under the conference room's lights, and her amber eyes held the kind of intelligence that suggested she'd been listening to the entire proceeding and had formed some very definite opinions about what she'd heard. "Ambassador Nexia," Administrator Kellix said, her crystalline features brightening with what was either relief or panic. "We weren't expecting you." "I imagine not," Ambassador Nexia replied, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Nexari one of the few species whose language actually improved when run through universal translators. "I received word that there was a situation involving members of my species." Commander Zorak cleared his throat. "Ambassador, I assure you that this is simply an administrative matter. We have everything under control." Ambassador Nexia's gaze swept the room, taking in the assembled tribunal, the stacks of legal documents, and finally settling on Willa, who was still sitting at the wrong end of the table with a Nexari cub asleep in her hands. "Under control," the ambassador repeated, and somehow managed to make those three words sound like a question, a statement, and a mild rebuke all at once. "Well," Zorak amended, "mostly under control." The second cub chose that moment to emerge from Willa's hoodie pocket, take one look at the newcomer, and emit a series of chirps that sounded remarkably like excitement. Ambassador Nexia's amber eyes widened, and she took a step forward. "May I?" she asked Willa, extending her hands. "Sure." Willa carefully transferred the sleepy cub to the ambassador's palm. "They're pretty friendly once they get used to you." Ambassador Nexia held the cub close to her face and began making a series of soft sounds that were clearly Nexari, but somehow more complex than anything the cubs had produced. The cub responded with increasingly animated chirping, and within moments what appeared to be an actual conversation was taking place. "Fascinating," cultural liaison Vorthak observed. "The cubs seem to recognize her." "Of course they recognize me," Ambassador Nexia said, without taking her attention away from the cub. "I should hope so, considering I helped deliver them." The conference room went very quiet. "Excuse me," Administrator Kellix said faintly. Ambassador Nexia looked up from the cub, which had now been joined by its sibling and was engaged in what appeared to be a very animated report about the past 6 days. "These are my daughter's cubs, my grandchildren, if you will." The silence that followed this revelation was broken only by the soft sounds of cubs telling their grandmother all about their adventures with the nice human who had warm pockets and interesting thumbs. "Your daughter?" Commander Zorak repeated slowly. Kita. She was on a diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim when the meteor shower struck your station. I've been searching for her for days. Willa looked up from watching the cubs climb all over their grandmother. Wait, you're their grandmother? I am. And you, Ambassador Nexia said, fixing Willa with a look that was part gratitude and part assessment. Are the human who saved their lives. I didn't really save them. I just helped. You found my injured daughter, provided medical care, and then cared for her cubs when she couldn't. In Nexari culture, that makes you a hero. A hero? Willa looked genuinely surprised. I just did what anyone would do. No, Ambassador Nexia said firmly. You did what a member of the pack would do. The fact that you're not Nexari makes it even more significant. Cultural liaison. Vorthak's translator crackled to life. Ambassador, are you saying that this human is considered pack family under Nexari law? I'm saying more than that. Ambassador Nexia gently set the cubs back in Willa's hands, where they immediately settled in as if they'd never left. I'm saying that by Nexari standards, she's already been formally adopted. Adopted? Administrator Kellix's voice went up about 3 octaves. The head-bonding ritual that my daughter performed. It's not just acceptance. It's legal adoption into the pack structure. As far as Nexari law is concerned, this human has full custody rights. Commander Zorak was making notes on his datapad with the desperate efficiency of someone who knew this was about to get even more complicated. And Nexari law is recognized under the Cultural Practices Exemption Clause. It is indeed. So, legally speaking, Ambassador Nexia said, with what might have been amusement, you've been conducting a custody hearing without the legal guardian present. The tribunal exchanged looks that suggested they were all reconsidering their career choices. But wait, Willa said, looking confused. If I'm legally their guardian, why are we having this hearing at all? Because, Cultural Liaison Vorthak said, with his translator adding a note of weary resignation, station regulations require authorization for all biological specimens, regardless of legal custody. They're not specimens, Ambassador Nexia said, and her voice carried an edge that made everyone in the room suddenly very aware that Nexari diplomats were also, traditionally, warriors. They're sentient juveniles under the protection of a recognized guardian. Of course, Administrator Kellix said quickly. A poor choice of words. Ambassador Nexia looked around the conference table with the expression of someone who was rapidly losing patience with bureaucratic nonsense. Let me see if I understand the situation. My daughter was injured. This human provided aid. My daughter, following our cultural traditions, formally adopted her rescuer into our pack. The cubs, behaving as cubs naturally do, bonded with their new pack member. And your response to this textbook example of interspecies cooperation was to, what exactly? Threaten the human with criminal charges? We didn't threaten, Commander Zorak began. You conducted a tribunal. You questioned her actions. You treated her like a criminal instead of a hero. Ambassador Nexia's amber eyes were now glowing with what was definitely not amusement. Am I missing something? There are protocols, Vorthak started. There are also common sense and basic decency, Ambassador Nexia interrupted. This human acted with honor and compassion. She saved lives. She provided care when it was needed. She respected our cultural practices even without understanding them. And your response was paperwork? Willa cleared her throat. To be fair, I did fill out the paperwork wrong. You filled out paperwork at all. Ambassador Nexia said. More than most species would have done. The forms were really confusing, though. I'm sure they were. Most bureaucracy is designed to discourage, rather than facilitate. Administrator Kellix was looking at her tablet, with the expression of someone who'd just realized they might have made a significant error in judgment. Ambassador, what would you recommend as a resolution to this situation? I would recommend, Ambassador Nexia said, that you formally recognize what has already occurred. This human is now, legally and culturally, a member of our pack. The cubs are in her care, with full parental authority. When my daughter is ready to travel, they will all return to Nexari space, together. All of them? Willa asked. Of course. You're family now, but I have a job here. Research projects. A life. Ambassador Nexia looked at her with something that might have been fondness. My dear child, do you think Nexari space lacks opportunities for xenobiologists? We have 3 research stations, 2 universities, and a planetary institute that would be delighted to have someone with your unique approach to problem solving. My unique approach? You see a problem, you solve it. You see someone who needs help, you help them. You ignore stupid rules that get in the way of doing what's right. Ambassador Nexia smiled, showing teeth that were definitely designed for more than just eating vegetables. These are valuable qualities. Commander Zorak looked like he was having some kind of internal crisis. But if she leaves, who's going to handle the xenobiology lab? You could try following actual protocols for once, Ambassador Nexia suggested helpfully. Our protocols don't account for situations like this. Then perhaps your protocols need revision. Dr. Venth's voice crackled through the communicator. If I may interrupt this philosophical discussion, I have an update on our patient. Go ahead, Doctor, Administrator Kellix said. Kita is conscious and asking for her cubs. When I explained the situation, she seemed amused. Amused? Commander Zorak asked. She said, and I quote, "Of course the human adopted them. Humans always adopt things. It's what they do." Ambassador Nexia laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. My daughter knows her xenobiology. Humans do indeed have a tendency to adopt anything that needs care. It's not like I go around adopting random aliens, Willa protested. No, you just adopt injured mothers and their cubs, stray research assistants who can't find the cafeteria, and according to your personnel file, at least 6 different species of station maintenance fauna. The maintenance fauna are technically part of the ecosystem, and Henderson was genuinely lost. I couldn't just leave him wandering around the storage levels. My point exactly, Ambassador Nexia said. You see something that needs help, you help it. It's a very Nexari way of thinking. One of the cubs, apparently bored with the adult conversation, had begun exploring Willa's sleeve and discovered the fascinating properties of elastic cuffs. The other cub, not to be outdone, had found her shoelaces and was conducting what appeared to be a scientific study into their tensile strength. So, Administrator Kellix said slowly, if we were to formalize this arrangement, you would be recognizing an existing legal relationship under Nexari cultural law, Ambassador Nexia confirmed, which, incidentally, would resolve your authorization issues. Nexari guardians have automatic clearance for cub care under interstellar treaty provisions. Cultural liaison Vorthak's translator crackled. That would actually solve most of our legal problems. Most of them. Well, there's still the matter of the improper paperwork. Willa looked up from where she was gently untangling a cub from her shoelaces. What if I promised to fill out the right forms this time? That would be acceptable, Vorthak admitted. Commander Zorak was staring at his datapad like it might spontaneously combust. So we're saying that the solution to this entire crisis is to do nothing. Sometimes, Ambassador Nexia said, the best solution is to recognize that the problem has already solved itself. The cubs, apparently sensing that the tension in the room had decreased, had settled down for another nap. One was curled up in the crook of Willa's elbow, while the other had somehow managed to wedge itself into her hoodie pocket, with just its tail sticking out. "Well," Administrator Kellex said finally, "I suppose we should make this official." "Official how?" Willa asked. "Paperwork," Commander Zorak said, with the tone of someone who was resigned to his fate. "Lots and lots of paperwork." Ambassador Nexia smiled. "Don't worry. I'll help you fill it out correctly this time." "You know station bureaucracy?" "I know 17 different bureaucracies. They're all basically the same once you understand that the goal is to make simple things complicated and complicated things impossible." Willa looked down at the cubs, then at Ambassador Nexia, then at the assembled tribunal. "So we're good? No interstellar incidents, no criminal charges, no diplomatic crises?" "We're good," Administrator Kellex confirmed, "though I suspect Commander Zorak is going to implement some new protocols for future situations." "Oh, definitely," Zorak said, starting with a mandatory briefing on what constitutes heroic rescue versus unlawful detention when it comes to injured aliens. "And maybe a map of where the actual embassies are located," Willa suggested helpfully. "That too." Ambassador Nexia stood, her elegant form somehow managing to make even the utilitarian conference room look more sophisticated. "If we're finished here, I'd like to see my daughter and formally thank the human who saved my family." "Her name is Willa," Commander Zorak said. "I know her name. I also know that after today, she'll be known as something else entirely." "What's that?" Willa asked. Ambassador Nexia smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, she looked less like a diplomat and more like a grandmother. "Pack's sister, guardian, family." The cubs chose that moment to wake up and begin chirping what sounded like agreement, and Willa found herself smiling despite everything. Maybe filling out the wrong paperwork hadn't been such a mistake after all. 3 weeks later, Willa sat at her workstation in Research Wing Delta, a steaming cup of something that was definitely coffee in one hand and a datapad in the other. The cubs were exactly where they'd been every morning since the tribunal, dozing contentedly in her hoodie pocket, occasionally stirring to chirp at passing colleagues who'd learned to bring small treats as tribute to the station's newest residents. "Security report, Level Delta," came Commander Zorak's voice over the intercom, but now his tone carried a note of fond exasperation rather than panic. "Daily Cub Wellness Check, Laboratory 12 Delta." The security officer who poked his head through the doorway was Henderson, the same research assistant Willa had rescued from the storage levels months ago. He'd requested a transfer to security after what he called the revelation that some problems are more interesting than others. "Cubs accounted for and napping," he reported into his communicator. "Guardian appears functional and caffeinated." "Confirmed," Willa called out without looking up from her datapad. "Though I think they're getting bigger." "My pocket's getting crowded." One of the cubs responded to this comment by stretching, poking its head out, and fixing Henderson with a look that clearly said, "Got any of those berry treats?" "Sorry, little one," Henderson said, producing a small container from his belt. "Protocol now requires me to carry emergency snacks." The cub accepted the offering with the dignity of royalty receiving tribute, then settled back into the pocket with a satisfied purr. Dr. Venth appeared in the doorway, no longer looking perpetually exasperated, but rather pleased with himself. The Nexari Medical Exchange Program proposal was approved, he announced. Congratulations, Willa. You're about to become very busy. Busy how? Well, it turns out that Nexari physiology shares enough similarities with several other mammalian species that your unconventional care techniques could revolutionize interspecies pediatric medicine. He grinned, showing far too many teeth for a herbivore. You're going to be teaching courses. I don't know how to teach courses. You'll learn. Besides, Ambassador Nexia says the first class is just Nexari medical students. How hard can it be? The second cub emerged from the hoodie pocket, with what sounded distinctly like laughter. Administrator Kellix's voice crackled through the communicator. Willa! Incoming transmission from Nexari space! The holographic display activated, revealing Kita, now fully recovered, and standing in what appeared to be a garden filled with plants Willa didn't recognize but desperately wanted to study. Behind her, several adult Nexari were engaged in what looked like a friendly argument about something involving a lot of gesturing. Pack sister, Kita said warmly. The family is eager to meet you. How soon can you visit? Willa looked down at the cubs, who were now both awake and chirping excitedly at the sight of their mother. Well, I've got about 6 different research proposals to finish, 3 department meetings, and Commander Zorak wants me to help revise the station's emergency protocols. Bring the work with you, Kita suggested. We have excellent research facilities, and the cubs miss the gardens. Plus, came Ambassador Nexia's voice from off-screen, we have a rather interesting xenobiology project that could use someone with your particular talents. What kind of project? The kind that starts with, we found something unusual, and usually ends with, but it followed me home. Willa grinned. That does sound like my kind of project. Commander Zorak's voice came through the communicator with a tone of resignation that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Station Omega-9 to all personnel. Please note that Research Assistant Willa's temporary absence for cultural exchange purposes has been approved. Repeat, this is an authorized absence, not another crisis. Hey, Willa protested. My crises always work out in the end. Eventually, Zorak agreed, usually after giving everyone involved premature graying. Henderson laughed. At least this time we know where the embassy is. The cubs chirped in unison, as if agreeing that this was definitely progress. As Willa began packing her research materials, she reflected on how strange life could be. 3 weeks ago, she'd been just another xenobiology assistant with a tendency to bend rules and adopt strays. Now she was a legally recognized member of an alien family, an unofficial ambassador for human Nexari relations, and apparently an expert in interspecies childcare. Not bad for someone who filled out the wrong paperwork, she murmured to the cubs, who responded with the kind of purring that sounded distinctly like agreement. Outside her lab window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, carrying ships and stories and endless possibilities between worlds that were learning, slowly but surely, that the universe was a much more interesting place when its inhabitants looked out for each other. Even if it did require a lot of paperwork,